Welcome back to AI for Founders. I'm Ryan Estes, and today we're diving into one of the biggest opportunities in healthcare and artificial intelligence, closing the evidence gap. My guest is Dr. Brigham Hyde, co-founder and CEO of Atropos Health, the company behind ChatRWD, a generative AI platform that turns real-world healthcare data into clinical evidence in minutes instead of months. Atropos has raised more than 50 million, partners with giants like Merck and McKesson, and is tackling the mind-blowing fact that only 14% of medical decisions today are backed by high-quality evidence. This conversation is for founders, investors, and builders who want to understand how AI can save lives, not just improve margins. You'll learn how Brigham's team built an AI engine trusted by doctors, how they avoid hallucinations in high-stakes environments, and what it really takes to scale an AI company that blends science, speed, and ethics. If you're curious about the intersection of medicine, machine learning, and market opportunity, this one's going to light you up. And if you love this podcast, you're going to love the newsletter. Go to aiforfounders.co and sign up for that today. This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster, the easiest way to get founders booked on podcasts. If you ever wanted to share your story on shows just like this one, to connect with new customers, investors, or talent, Kitcaster makes it happen. Their team of expert agents pitch your message to curated podcasts, get you booked, and even prep you for each appearance so you sound like the pro you already are. Over 800 clients have used Kitcaster to become industry influencers, generate millions in revenue, and build authority that lasts. So if you're ready to turn conversations into conversions, head over to kitcaster.com and apply to join today. Kitcaster, podcasts are the new stage. Let's get you on it. That's Kitcaster by Moburst. All right. Coffee is great, but coffee won't prep your meetings for you. It'll just keep you awake while you panic, hastily scrolling through LinkedIn at 6:59 a.m. Ambient, however, will prep your meetings. Each morning you get a founder-tuned briefing sourced overnight from your calendar, your meeting history, and the web. It's like walking into every call with a cheat sheet that you didn't have to write. No more scrambling, no more guessing, just context, confidence, and focus. And if you're raising money, ambient investor dossiers are an absolute must-have. You'll know the investor's portfolio, their interests, and their latest moves before you even step into the room. You'll even get a heads up on red flags. Think of it as the caffeine upgrade that your calendar actually needs. Prep while you sleep, perform while you're awake. Sign up for free at ambient.us. Go check it out at ambient.us. That's ambient.us. Brigham, welcome to the show. I sure appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I want to talk about Atropos Health, your company, and I want you to introduce it with this amazing statistic right on the front page of your website. So it says only 14% of daily medical decisions are backed by high-quality evidence.
That's actually one of the higher estimates, believe it or not. And when I sort of say this stat to people who aren't in healthcare, they're like, what do you mean? The sort of nice way to say it would be, this is the art of medicine. Doctors, amazing individuals, rely on their training and experience to make decisions. But the reality is we're just not producing enough evidence to help inform them. And I trust a physician. If you give them a well-done study, a publication, peer-reviewed, they can read it, they know what to do with it, they can use it to make decisions, but we just don't have enough. And the reasons why, maybe not surprising, but we just don't run enough clinical trials, right? They're expensive, and most of them, are funded by drug companies to focus on very specific populations. They also tend to include the healthiest people because they want to make sure the effects aren't confounded. And the stat I sort of always include after we say that stat is, if you look at the trials we do have, the 14% we do have evidence for, 70% of those trials exclude patients with comorbidities. And that includes things like diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Guess what percent of US patients that is? About 60, 70% of the patients. So even the evidence we do have was done on, I like to say, white male triathletes at Memorial Sloan Kettering, right? Not on your average patient. So all this is to say the purpose of our company is to fill what we call the evidence gap. We need more evidence. If there is good, high quality evidence out there, doctors know what to do with it. And we built our company around solving that problem.
Incredible. So how are you aggregating this evidence? Are you funding studies? Are you bringing studies together into one centralized location? And then who is the audience ultimately? Is it patients? Is it doctors? Is it both?
Yeah, to tell a little the origin story, all this started at Stanford University. And my co-founder is Dr. Nigam Shah, who's the chief data scientist at Stanford. And he began something within Stanford called the green button. Okay. Green button, blue button, they have meaning in healthcare. And the idea was you press the green button and through technology he built, they would run a brand new study in real time or close to it at that point that would run on patient data. So all this data that's been collected about us in the EHRs and things like that, it's been being built up for the last 20 years or so, but doing something with it to inform a decision, converting it from just data to evidence was the part that was hard and needed to be automated. And that's the core of what we do, is that conversion from data into evidence. And what do I mean about that? What I mean is you have to do the analysis the right way. There are techniques, methods, statistical approaches, some AI related, some even more basic, that are just hard to do typically, even if you have the data. And if you do them wrong, it won't pass peer review. It wouldn't meet the standards of medical evidence. So doing it well and doing it quickly is what we enabled. And that ran within Stanford for about 18 months. They had hundreds of physicians use it. The ratings were extremely high, and there were amazing stories in there. I'll give you just one. There was a case where the neurology department, they had a young boy come in who was about 12. He had distal nerve pain, meaning tingling and pain in his limbs. The immediate concern from the neurology team was, man, this might be early onset MS, which is rare in children, but like the signature sort of looked like that. And the action to take would have been to do a spinal tap, would have been to do a big imaging workup, stick him in a tube. Parents of the child obviously concerned about this. These are big procedures, scary, dangerous. And one of the neurology team members had access to our tool and said, wait a minute, before we do that, let's see if we can ask Atropos what happened to patients with this presentation, what typically occurred with them, maybe what treatments, what diagnostics worked. We ran that study in a matter of 4 hours of the time. We now do these in minutes. This is 5 years ago. And they came back, they found that across the data at Stanford, we now have much more data at other institutions, but at that time in Stanford, there's about 300 kids who looked really similar. And about 85% of them had had a latent viral infection within the last 2 weeks. They had not confirmed that with the patient and the family yet. They asked them and said, was he sick, over the last couple of weeks? And they said, yes, actually he had a viral respiratory illness. They gave him corticosteroids, which would be sort of a normal treatment for that. Within 24 hours, the distal nerve pain went away. There was no workup, no spinal tap, no need for a $30,000 procedure to be done. And the family was incredibly happy, right? Because one, it relieved their concerns. They had an idea what it might be. And they avoided something that might have been more difficult for their child. They monitored for 2 days. The symptoms went away. And it was a great success story. By the way, success story for the patient, for the physician team, and for the cost of healthcare. All of those were big wins, just in one example.
It's incredible. And, the siloed information in the kind of medical industry is kind of a known issue and always has been. So was the problem really the data being an aggregate, or is it just so much information it's hard to parse prior to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I started my career as a bench researcher, got my PhD at Tufts University in Boston in the early days of the genome revolution. And I think we all felt in the 2000s, maybe showing my age there, that all this data would be flowing magically. You also had the High-Tech Act, which created electronic medical record mandates, and we thought we're off to the races. Well, you're right; it actually didn't go quite that way for the first 10 or so years. But the truth is now we have a lot of data of a lot of different types: imaging, omics, claims, EHR, registries, patient-reported data. And over the last, I'd say 5 to 8 years, the silo problem has started to come down. And that's because of two things. One, cloud computing is everywhere, and healthcare data is no longer locked in a server in the basement of a hospital. It's on the cloud, private clouds, hybrid clouds. And that means it's available to compute. The other thing is that we've done a good job handling identity. So things like de-identifying patients, companies like Datavant have built a lot of infrastructure to do this safely. And that brings us to companies in our generation, which are really more focused on the application layer. One of the things that we do is we work in a federated way, which in healthcare, I think is the way to go, meaning I don't buy and sell data. I don't move data around. The data never leaves the healthcare system where I think it's appropriately stewarded. Instead, we're bringing technology through the cloud directly to that data, and that opens up the silo problem. As I sit here right now, we have over 20 different core data sets on what we call our evidence network. These include health systems, individual health systems, and other data partners. And I have over 894 million patient timelines. That's a lot of data. And when you're in the prediction game and you're in the AI game, that's great substrate to be able to produce really high quality, high performant models that enable these use cases we're talking about.
100%. So one of your kind of marquee products it's called ChatRWD, and it's a generative AI chat to database interface. So it's basically, I'm assuming, kind of like a chat function for the data that patients or doctors can use. Explain what the product does.
Yeah. Back to the Stanford days, right? We made some good choices. Then this before LLMs had come out in the way that, the release of OpenAI originally that really took the world by storm. But even then, we realized the user experience for clinicians, if you made it any more difficult than a couple of sentences like they're emailing or texting a peer, they weren't going to use it, right? This is about user experience. So we always had a text-based input to our system. When LLMs came out, as many companies at the early stage did, we sort of said, hey, does ChatGPT do my company now? We tested that, and for a variety of reasons, both in the early days and now, the hallucination rates associated with LLMs and some of the things that we do that don't allow for that level of error meant that we felt pretty good that we were okay. But we did say, hey, look, these are great tools. Why don't we build some infrastructure atop this to add to user experience? So ChatRWD became the co-pilot on the front end of our tools where a user could talk back and forth to doing that. We don't have our own LLM there. We're using a RAG framework, which is something many people have done, that leverage the infrastructure of all these big LLMs out there. So, we train and subtrain on our content, OpenAI or Claude, and, these things get better and worse every month on the scoreboard. So we built it to be flexible. As these tools improve, our thing improves. And we focus on using them for our user experience and on our users' needs. And so now that's that MS example of the child with those symptoms, that would take approximately 20 seconds to get that answer.
Yeah.
And the doctor could do it right in the ER, just typing right into their phone.
It's incredible. Is it available for patients as well?
So we've not made it available to patients yet. I think we work really closely with the clinical community. Like, this is a big change happening in how doctors practice medicine, how they discover evidence and insights. We have had patients reach out. What we say to them is, please add your doctor to the chat. We'd be happy to talk to them. At the same time, Brian, I think you're right to ask that, because I think we're in a stage of consumer healthcare, be it longevity, or other things like Epic has announced a patient-facing agent now that the patient can talk to. Alibaba also has one. Tempest in the oncology realm has talked about it. And I think the gun has been fired on the patient-facing application. I am certain that OpenAI, Meta, Claude, they're all receiving a ton of patient healthcare questions. Our view is, let's just make sure we do it the right way. Let's get the clinical community bought in. Then we can think about how that user experience can evolve to patients.
100%. And this kind of taps into, I think, a lot of frustrations maybe folks have with the healthcare system. And I won't say a lot of people. I'll just say from my experience, that's to say that I understand and support doctors, and they have a hard task at hand, which is everybody's got their Google PhD, and so they're coming in. Not only that, but they have pharmaceutical drugs being advertised 24 hours a day on television, telling them you got to ask your doctor about, hey, is your big toe hurt? You should ask them about Tolextra or whatever it might be, So with me personally, there's all these options now for preventative health care, for performance enhancing. I'm 47, so you start wondering, like, okay, what about TRT? What about GLP-1s? What about these things that I don't necessarily have any pathology, but you get into kind of this gray area with doctors. So like you start coming to the doctor like, what about this? What about that? Well, you need to come in. Well, for me personally, I prefer telehealth. I don't want to go down and spend a half day in the doctor's office. So I guess all that's to say is that on one side, you have medicine is going to be radically disrupted and changed by these new technologies and new therapies. And the smarter AI gets in finding new therapies for us, it's going to change even more dramatically. On the other side, some might say that we live in a post-truth society where people can take data, and people do take data, and use it to fit certain agendas or ideologies or certain forms. Now I don't know if Tylenol is okay anymore. I don't know if I don't know if any of if the polio vaccine is bad. Like it's very hard to bridge that gap from data to what was it? It wasn't outcome. It was data to
Evidence.
Evidence. So like this is almost kind of a story that needs to be told. And collectively, we have to have some kind of foundation of trust and expectation. Is that part of the reason why you're kind of limiting it to clinicians as opposed to patients, so that basically you know that there's some
It's a really important question, and something I'm passionate about. And let me just tell you, like, I think it goes back to the first thing we talked about, which is the evidence gap. Okay. If there was evidence, okay, the doctors could administer it, and maybe even we could build ways for patients to consume it in an effective way. And let me just give you a dumb example. Let's say we're in our 40s, Ryan. Let's say Instagram tells us that an ashwagandha supplement is going to increase our testosterone and prolong our, healthy adulthood. Well, if you go to your doctor and ask him about that, what is your doctor going to say? Your doctor's going to say, there is no study out there that shows that this improves those metrics. Now, let's talk about why. Okay. It's not that maybe that's not interesting. It's just there's been no funding to run a clinical trial on ashwagandha supplements that could produce a peer-reviewed paper that your doctor could then review. And when you get into the funding of what gets studied and doesn't get studied, be that NIH and government down, or be that pharmaceutical and profit interest up, right? There's just a reality that there's nothing for your doctor to go reference. And the part about this that I find is a conundrum and why we focus so heavily on quality is because here's reality. I have a PhD in clinical pharmacology. I was trained in statistics and clinical trial methodologies. The problem for the consumer is, let's say I gave you two studies, one that said ashwagandha worked and one that said it didn't. Do you as the consumer have the ability to thoughtfully review the statistical methodology in a way to understand where bias may come in? And, I think the problem number one is there is no study. So let's get the studies. But once we get them, how do you create that discerning eye? And I think right now, the reality is that's where the role of experts like physicians still lives. But if we had those studies, could we build a user experience that translates that in a way members can understand? And I can tell you, in some partnerships, we have looked at creating member-facing deliverables, meaning the patient could actually get one of my reports. And when we do that, it's really about UI and user experience and explaining complex statistics. It goes from being a 30-page report to a two-page report with two key graphics on it, right? That then citations so you can go back and review. Like those changes have yet to totally be figured out. And here's the risk, okay? In the world that I live in, which is around real-world evidence and observational research, the approach and method are super important. If you do a study in an incorrect manner, it might show that, that sulfonylurea added to your diabetes regimen would help lower A1C. But the potential bias of this data is maybe that's just because everybody who happened to be on a sulfonylurea in the data was healthier, right? And you don't want to make a wrong conclusion like it's the drug causing this that could confound things. And, the Tylenol debate has only started. I'm sure there'll be lots of good studies that'll peel apart those elements, right, to try and determine causation, because that is the importance of these statistical techniques. In observational research, you have to hold everything else the same and only change one variable, the treatment, right? And you have to make sure if you show an outcome change, like they get better or worse, that it's because of the treatment, not because of some bias in the data. So this is a hard problem. Okay, we're right on the front line of it. I think it starts with creating more studies so that they're out there so that the experts can figure out how to deal with them. And then it's about how do you change that user experience and get it down to patients so they can factor into their own consumer choices, which are coming at them left, right, and center.
Yeah. It's interesting kind of talking about bias because, there's like confirmation bias you have that you want to be right. There's the bias of like the test itself, to your point. It's like when they studied, they're like, wow, people who smoke tobacco have really high testosterone.
Sure.
And they're like, yeah, well, those people are more social generally. And so it's not causal. So
yeah, when you get to causal inference, which are the methods we use, you've got to know the cause is the one variable in a therapy you might have changed. And all the statistical techniques we use are designed around optimizing to ensure that, which is really critical.
And how do we
I don't know how we got in a big statistical discussion here. I love it, but it may be a little deep for the audience. My point is that method and quality matter when you're making decisions about somebody's life or death. And we're trying to ensure that that layer flows in as all this great automation and scale come with it.
Okay, everyone loves to talk about vision, the pitch, the funding round, but you know what gets zero love? The actual product build. That magical, terrifying phase where nothing works, the docs are out of date, and you've asked your dev team, how's it going, for the 47th time today on Slack. That's where Code Story comes in. It's a podcast for startup founders who know that building the thing is the thing. Hosted by Noah Labhart, Code Story goes deep with tech leaders who've been through it, shipping real products, surviving messy launches, and figuring out what actually works and when you're on the edge of chaos. If you're building now or ever plan to, you'll want these stories in your earballs. Search Code Story wherever you get your podcasts or visit codestory.co because founders talk vision, but builders tell code stories. Okay, I've got a confession. As a podcaster and founder, I'm constantly meeting incredible people, guests, listeners, or other entrepreneurs. But here's my little secret. I'm terrible at following up. My inbox is basically a graveyard of missed opportunities. Does that sound like you? You meet someone amazing, exchange emails, have great intentions, and then life happens. 6 months later, you're kicking yourself thinking, I should have stayed in touch with that person. This is exactly why I started using warmstart.ai. And honestly, it's transformed how I think about my network. Instead of letting relationships go cold, Warmstart analyzes my existing contacts and helps me identify who I should be reaching out to and why. It even writes the outreach messages for me. But here's the key. I review everything before it goes out. I'm not just talking about this because they're a sponsor. I'm talking about it because watching a healthcare executive use this to build his entire advisory board in one weekend with 4 CEO signups made me realize I was leaving money on the table every single day. Your network is your net worth, but only if you actually nurture it. Check out warmstart.ai, use code AIFF to get $50 off your first month. Stop letting your relationships turn into missed revenue. 100%, but there is some responsibility, some personal responsibility to be able to check your own biases when you're viewing any data, as you're making any health decisions. Problem is we seem to be like celebrating our ignorance of bias culturally right now for some reason. What do you think is a salve for that? Is it just basic scientific understanding, the ability to admit when you might be wrong? Because if you did show me 2 studies about ashwagandha, and I'm already like, I don't like ashwagandha, it's got a scary name, and then I'm going to point directly to like, well, this one said no, so
right. Look, I think you're referencing it culturally, and I think you probably have your finger on the pulse of something there. I see it a little bit differently as a technology person. I think we have an explosion happening in information, right? And we're dealing with it in different parts of our lives, media, for instance, like God knows we don't need another Marvel movie, right? Like there's just so much to process. So now what's happening is we're figuring out how to sort through and process that. So while it's expressing itself culturally, I think you're onto something there. I do think it's more like in the information step we're in the information age, this is just a hard period to sort through things. I don't mind the idea, though, that we're blowing up old systems. You're talking about somebody who's trained in the old system, okay? And I don't like the idea that a small number of people, experts, corporate entities control what evidence gets generated. Why can't we run an ashwagandha study? And the reason 10 years ago, 15 years ago would have been it's too expensive and there's no profit motive. Well, if we can lower the cost of running these studies, then we can create good ones. Then we'll figure out how to process through it. So I'm trying to tackle that problem first. Then we'll tackle the how do we sort through it all and make sense of it problem.
Totally. And you've got like your double-blind placebo-based studies and all these kind of things that are very formal. But what about just this flood of data you're talking about? You mentioned like longevity specialist, which is really kind of like just a keyword for people doing really cool kind of like therapies where maybe you go get an MRI and you send all the data through some like LLM so it can scan everything for you. And it's basing that against different data. Is there a pool of data that you guys are collecting that's not necessarily clinical trials, rather it's just like all of this girth of testing information? Now, obviously that's going to be protected for people's privacy, but is there an opt-in function where you can collectively maybe take the pulse of 5 billion people at some point?
Yeah, I mean, we're at hundreds of millions now. We have it. And we have that depth. It is de-identified and we don't identify individual patients, but it's powerful. And I sort of, having spent my life doing this, I have sort of a recurring nightmare that like the cure to cancer is sitting in some data I have access to. I just didn't look, right? So like, I know we've only begun to tap the power of that, and the computational power of compute and LLMs added to that, it's scaling incredibly fast. We're going to discover things at a pace never seen before. I'll give you a sort of less consumery example of where I think this is starting to apply. If you look at, drugs that have been approved for a while, and we know that they're safe, relatively speaking, an antibiotic or something that's been taken millions of times. And in the data I have, I can see it's not causing a significant number of adverse events. Well, if I can apply an algorithm to that data and I can figure out that that drug might be really useful for another disease, why are we waiting 15 years to approve it, right? We know it's safe, it's out there. And if we can create evidence and give that context to clinicians who are already prescribing it, maybe that's something to think about. And I tend to think we actually have maybe a lot of the drugs we need. We just haven't identified their use case. So let's tell one story about this. At Stanford, there's a researcher named Dylan Dodd, and Dylan researches at a basic science level the gut microbacterium. He does all the sequencing, all the basic science papers. And he was looking at this in animal models of inflammatory conditions, and one of the models was gout. And he basically looked at it, he said, well, if I can shift the gut bacteria mix this way, the gout goes away, and if I shift it this way, it gets worse. And he tried a couple of drugs that have long been approved. Clindamycin was one of them. There's another antibiotic he used. And he basically found that one antibiotic shifted the gut bacteria, made the gout go away, and then the other one made it worse. And he's about to publish his findings. He ends up publishing in Nature. He has access to us. So he called and says, hey, he goes, surely in your data, somebody with gout must have taken these antibiotics, right? And just by chance, maybe they took it for something else. And he's like, can we see if they got better? And he's like, on the one that made it worse, see if they got worse. And he's like, by the way, let's look at everybody who's ever taken this antibiotic and see if there's less gout. And we ran that study in a day, brought it back. We're talking millions of patients. And it was clear as day. Like these antibiotics were both causing it, some were causing it, and some were causing it to go away. He even understood the basic science mechanism in the gut bacteria. He added our data to his publication and got, a top tier journal for it. And it's now in the literature. And think of that as opposed to the 15 years it would take to develop a drug for gout. When we could just find out in a couple of days, oh, wow, this actually looks like this works. Like with high statistical surety, like maybe somebody should be taking that for gout, right? Instead of needing all this time. And my hope in the regulatory space is that the FDA starts to respond to this. We have stuff, again, I think the FDA is a bit controversial right now, but they do seem to want to improve and speed up drug development. And you take what they're doing in orphan drugs where they have a fast track. With the right road evidence on the right drugs that are proven safe already in humans, shouldn't we find a way to fast track these new therapies? And we work closely with a group called Every Cure. A guy named David Feigenbaum, very famously, he's a Penn Med student, got a rare disease, used this type of data approach to find a cure to his own rare disease. He's a great guy, and he's advocating out now for this type of thing, which is called drug repositioning. If there's therapies out there that we know are safe, but they haven't been proven to work in your disease yet, but we could prove it quickly with great data and sort of method. Why are we not doing that faster? We might have a truth already.
Why aren't we? That's a great question. I mean, I'm looking at this. It's like data to evidence seems like the most clear, no-brainer medical product of all time. When I look at kind of the history of the company, it looks like you guys raised 54 million, launched in 2020. Why wasn't this launched in 1980?
Good question. I would say the roots of this idea. Okay, we call the report we give to doctors, we call it a prognostogram. It's a PDF report. The reason we call it that is because this all started at the Duke Group back in the 70s. So like the original paper was called, they spelled it differently than we do, but about producing a prognostogram on data. I'd say we spent 25 years between the 70s and the 2000s getting the data. We didn't have data. Well, guess what? We have data now, okay? Then what we had to build was the automation. And that's what our company represents because typically speaking, let's say without us, if you had data, it usually takes between 2 to 5 months to produce one study. And we work with life science pharmaceutical companies. That's been the standard for them. It takes them big teams of people. With our tool, they can do it in a day. So, that automation has business value to them, helps accelerate their process of developing cures just on their internal process. But it was that conversion step. First was we didn't have the data. Then the data was bad. We had to make it better. Now we have good data and a lot of it. Now we got to convert it to evidence with automation. That's the step we're at.
Amazing. Yeah, because I think before, I'm pretty sure this is right, before the 1970s, the kind of data they were doing was like basically standing around with a scotch saying, because I said so. I think that's
the Duke Group had punch card IBM machines.
Yeah.
The start of all this, right? Like literally, you can go back and we have the paper somewhere. That's how this all began. The idea of a learning health system started there. And we're really talking about here is personalized medicine. And it's funny because that term gets thrown around all the time, but it's like, this is actually it, right? Like here's a study on 50,000 people just like you, all your genomics, all your history, matched to you. And here's the evidence that this would work better or this would work better for you. Yeah. Listen.
As a patient, that's very exciting to me because again, like I've always kind of straddled multiple worlds. I'm a bit of a hippie, let's say. So I'm interested in nutrition and you go to your doctor and you're like, hey, should I be getting more vitamin C and D? And like, what about echinacea? And they're like, eat what tastes good, take these 2 pills. You're like, that's unsatisfying. So you go to your naturopathic doctor and you're like, well, I think I sprained my ankle. What should I do? They're like, rub it with a crystal. You're like, oh, that's not satisfying. Like
we haven't run any crystal studies yet. We could.
It could work. I mean, it's a little cooler, but it just seems like there's a lot of disparate people that have like these different ideologies, and finally it's starting to blend together. I'm meeting a lot of physicians that know a lot about like nutrition and sports medicine and a lot of openness.
Not to be too one note about this, Ryan, but what are they all grasping at? There's no study to tell you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And we talked through why that is the case, but what if it wasn't? What if we could produce these things? I mean, right now, in addition to being able to produce a study on demand, we have over 100,000 novel studies that we produced that exist in a library for us to reference. And I would tell you that like back of the envelope math, if we wanted to be larger than PubMed, all the publications in the world, we could be there within a couple of years. So imagine the entire basis of medical literature being replaced in 3 years or exceeded. So like if we solve that problem and find the content that your naturopath needs to say, hey, look at the p-value of my crystal,
right.
What they need, right? So like if we can produce that, that's what I think the first solve is.
That kind of overhaul of the entire system sounds intimidating to me if I'm a doctor. Like how are doctors and boomers kind of aligning with the product? What is their reaction?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this comes back to where ChatRWD and LLMs play a really important role. It's not so much that an LLM by itself can make a new study. You need technology like ours to do that. But what it's great at is summarizing a lot of information, okay? And one of the things we do, and we published a paper on this recently, we took 3,000 questions and we ran it through ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, and our service, and we measured it on a evaluation system based on physician review called Answered with Evidence. Like when you summarize the answer back off all the publications in the world and all the stuff in our library, all the news studies, did you directly answer the question or not with evidence that would be backed up in a study? And so every answer we put out, we actually put a badge. If it's green, that's the answer. There's a study to cite. If it's yellow or red, we're kind of saying, hey, maybe there's not a study yet, in which case you can run a new one with us. And that summarization role is the key for doctors. And you're seeing this, they're using tools today like Open Evidence is out right now. It's had big uptake with users. The great user experience, like they're doing a great job summarizing, right? And I think summarization is the key to making it work for doctors and then eventually patients. I'm trying to solve the problem of they need a lot of stuff to summarize if you're going to be able to answer every question. If an LLM, if ChatGPT, you ask it a question, there is no study in the literature, there's never been a trial. What's ChatGPT going to do? It can't make up a trial that never happened, right? So it's a combination of the need for new content, high quality, and great summarization tools.
Amazing. If we're looking into the future here a little bit, back to our crystal ball, and we're thinking about ChatRWD, do you see this as like a robot that's walking around available for questions or making recommendations? Do you see this as like a chat interface? People are asking questions. Do you see this as something it's noticing trends and then kind of like creating studies specifically based on like data that's coming in? What kind of the future look like?
Yeah, so it's something we're really excited about. And I want to talk about agentic AI and what that I think means. And think of it this way, step out of healthcare for a minute. You remember when the iPhone came out?
Yeah.
What happened? All of a sudden we went from looking at our laptops all day long to looking at our phones, right? We call that a shift in glass. Your eyeballs are looking at a different thing or different interface, right? You could say the same thing happened with the App Store to some extent. We went from browsers to apps, right? We think agentic AI represents another shift in glass. Perhaps ever. I don't know about you in your personal life. I use agents like ChatGPT to book travel and stuff, maybe 20% of the time. Like I haven't switched all the way over. I'm still going to my apps. I'm still going to things. But what if all of a sudden I could just talk to an agent and it could go hit all my apps. It could do all the stuff in the background for me. Why would I look at a browser ever again? Why would I look at an app? I can just talk to my agent. My agent will go figure out how to get stuff done. And the healthcare context for this is really exciting because think of the average doctor who even 3 years ago spent most of their time logged into Epic, typing information into an EHR, or maybe looking up papers on a reference tool. That's what they did most of the time.
Yeah.
What if now, first of all, we have ambient AI, which in a physician setting means it'll record the visit while I'm talking to the patient, write the note for me, and then I can go ask my agent, hey, what should I prescribe for this person? Is there any evidence for it? And it can call an agent like ours in, give you the answer, and you don't even have to log into the HR. I mean, I'm married to a clinician. The idea of her not having to log into Epic ever again would make my household a happier place. So I promise you, I'm a fan of this. Has it happened all the way yet? No. But what I'm seeing on the ground, we're involved at Stanford. Stanford's the deployment site for Microsoft's agentic orchestration platform. And specifically, what they've done is they've created an agentic tumor board, okay? And what it looks like is it's actually a Teams chat. I can't believe it's Teams, but it looks and their doctors talking to each other in the chat and saying, hey, what do you think of this case? What should we do? They can invite agents into the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. And then ask different agents to do different things. There might be an imaging agent that says, hey, can you go figure out the size of the tumor on XYZ date? It'll go read the image. They can call us in and say, hey, okay, for a patient like this, Opdivo or Keytruda, which drug would be better? And we'll pull forward that study without them having to do anything else. So if this starts to shift, okay, all of a sudden you're representing a whole different way of working for doctors, by the way, much less burden, they're not doing documentation all the time. And then your agent and the way it interacts in that interface can really be orchestrating behind the scenes, sort of where it grabs key information from and feeding you back in a new way. Now, I'm not convinced we're 100% of the way there, but if that starts to happen, imagine that shift. You're going from reading your email, from logging into Epic, from using an app, to just talking to an agent to get your work done and, not having to do all that data entry, not having to have 10 logins to everything. So that's something we're watching really closely. I expect us to play at the forefront of that with ChatRWD. We think we have the premier evidence agent in that setting. So when it comes time to decide what treatment to give, we think we've got the best in breed right now. But it's early days.
Yeah, it's a data analysis, but then it would be data discovery and aggregation, So I love this idea of change of glass too. I mean, imagine if you just took the stethoscope that every doctor has around their neck at every waking moment and put a camera and a recorder in there. And so now it sees everything and everyone has it. So you don't have to do the data entry. Rather, all the data is coming in real time constantly, and it's all getting centralized into a massive hub. I mean,
maybe it knows before you even need to ask. I mean, I would tell you at Stanford with that deployment, in some settings now, while the doctor records the visit, is talking to the patient, as they swivel their chair over to look at the note, we're actually running in the background. Like they didn't even have to type us a question. We're absorbing from the visit what the key decisions are, producing the evidence and putting it right back in front of them. So I imagine it going to a place where it is almost passive in that way. And you're getting the best information you need, sort of the insight you need before you even know it.
Yeah, the promise of agentic AI is really interesting because then there's groups of agents that they're calling swarms. So you could have swarms gathering all this data from different angles for different tasks, talking to other agents to help collaborate on different projects. And we are heading to a place of like highly personalized, higher than 14% of data informed evidence.
It's a wonky area, but you just brought up something I'm really interested in, which is one of the things we're finding in this paper we just put out about 2 weeks ago. People can look up Atropos answer with evidence. One of the things we saw, in addition to just the rates of who answered the best, was how often do all these LLMs agree, right? Like, is there consensus formed between these things? And to your swarm idea, what's being called, like in the technical circles, is it's a jury approach. So what if we should ask everybody, ask ChatGPT, ask Gemini, ask us, ask everybody, see how the consensus is formed. And the role in agentic, and this is an idea for your founders out there, if you know a specific vertical or workflow application, you know how it needs to work, being the one who can coordinate the swarm in a way that knows when I should hit Gemini for this, when I should hit this application, and how to parse back consensus forming amongst those answers, that is the front line of agentic AI right now. And it is, to me, the argument that big tech doesn't swallow the world. Because in order to do that well, you have to have domain and vertical knowledge for your use case and workflow. And I think that's a great opportunity for startups right now.
100%. And there's got to be like a place for gut instinct, right? I mean,
well, that's kind of what it represents. It's like, you are a knowledge doing that review of the swarm, and you are an expert. How would you review it? And if you can represent that step, I think that here's why we do all this metric stuff, because I think that comes down to trust, right? At the end of the day, with agentic AI or any of it, it's going to come down, do the doctors or eventually maybe patients trust it or not? And trust equals adoption. So the ability to metricize and measure that you're doing that step right is actually going to be a differentiator. I think even a way to market your offering.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just trying to think of a case study, God forbid I have to see a urologist for some invasive surgery type situation, and GPT's telling me one thing and my doctor's telling me another thing. And I'd be like, wait, how many years of experience did you say you've done this? I'd be like, buddy, I'm going with you. I mean, GPT is fantastic, but at some point there's like,
what if you had an app that could take the input from your doctor, the email he sent you, hit 5 other LLMs, run a new study, compare and contrast differences, and bring it back in a way that you knew what the key decisions were and what the evidence for each of the decisions was? I mean, I think that we're now talking about agents of agents, I guess, but it will be there faster than we think, because I think that comes back to user experience and trust. Like, you need to trust it or you're not going to use it, right? So the fight for trust, particularly the medical realm, is going to be where the battle is, we think.
Cool. And speaking to the listeners, if anybody wants to make the wearable stethoscope, I'm in 100%. I love the idea of taking something as far away from AI as you can and bringing it as close as you possibly can to it.
Give Meta a call. Tell them to put the rifle on the stethoscope.
Be amazing. Cool. This has been awesome. Brigham, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Really briefly, and I don't want to pronounce it wrong, Atropos.
Yeah, you got it.
Atropos, who's the customer for Atropos?
Yeah, today we work with health systems, academic medical centers, community practices, on the provider side. I work with some payviders who are kind of insurance and health system, like a Kaiser, for example. We also work with life science companies. This automation we build is great to accelerate R&D. And I think, are bridging that way across the health system to where the need for evidence, this evidence gap is so prescient, and helping them fill it, for the long term, we'll see. I mean, the patient-facing version maybe someday, but I think for now, solving that evidence gap, getting that information out so people can consume and use it, both at the point of care and in research is where we're focused.
Yeah, incredible, very intuitive product. What's the next step? Are you guys going to raise more capital? Are you looking for strategic acquisitions? Are you looking to be acquired and sell the company? What makes most sense for you guys right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're having great growth in the business and sitting on cash, plenty of cash still from our B. I think the question at the forefront for us is, are these shifts happening? Shifts in glass, for instance, and agentic, and other things that may be worth doubling down. So we'll think about those opportunities that come through and try and hit that window to scale this everywhere.
Tremendous. People want to connect with you online. What's the best place to do it?
LinkedIn, I respond. So please shoot me a note. Love to talk to people.
Okay. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I want to give a shout out to Alex from Solcoms as well for making this happen, but super fun conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Had a great time.
Hey, founders, let me ask you this. Are you building with AI or getting left behind by it? If you're serious about scaling smarter, faster, and bolder, you need to check out aiforfounders.co. It's your go-to resource for cutting through the noise and actually using AI to grow your startup. Each week, AI for Founders drops a sharp, no-fluff newsletter, dives deep with expert guests on the podcast, and hosts monthly workshops where you can get your hands dirty with the real tools and strategies. Whether you're pre-seed or Series B and beyond, launching something new, or just staying sharp, AI for Founders gives you the edge you need to win in 2025 and beyond. Hit aiforfounders.co to subscribe to the newsletter, tune into the podcast, and grab your spot in the next workshop. And it's all free. Build smarter, move faster, think bolder with AI for Founders. Now back to the show. This episode is brought to you by MoBurst, the AI-first growth engine trusted by iconic startups like Calm, Robinhood, Reddit, Uber, and Google. MoBurst is a digital full-service mobile-first marketing agency that helps companies to scale and become category leaders. Whether you're finding product-market fit or ready to accelerate growth, MoBurst delivers creative, data-driven solutions that help with scale and efficiency and impact. At MoBurst, we're not just guessing what works, we're predicting it. As an AI-first agency, MoBurst uses cutting-edge tools to analyze user behavior, adapt creative in real time, and uncover hidden growth opportunities. The result, marketing that's faster, smarter, and built to convert. From early-stage startups to global brands, we've helped hundreds of companies overcome complex challenges, unlock new audiences, and optimize every metric that matters. At MoBurst, we believe that creative thinking, advanced technology, and data are the core drivers of success at scale. If you're serious about scaling your business with precision and purpose, it's time to talk to MoBurst. Visit moburst.com and let's build something category-defining together.